Good morning, good evening, good afternoon around the world to everybody watching VMworld 2020. Welcome to this on-demand presentation hosted by Cohesity. The title of this session will be Your First, Last, and Only Line of Defense, and there's a little bit of a play on words because Mike and I are really big Men in Black fans. So I'll be known as Agent C for the rest of this presentation. And if you want to follow this on Twitter or at least reach out to us, please use the hashtag ISCS2929S, which is the ID of the session, along with hashtag VMworld. With that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Michael Letcher.
So thanks, Chris. So being Agent M today, I'm going to dig into some information around what ransomware really means and what cybercrime means to the world, to your industries, to your companies today. So we're going to dive right into what some of these stats are. The first being one that really I think is important for everyone. When you look at how much is ransomware costing us. So the average payment that is made right now for a ransomware attack is over $111,000. Now this has been a pretty big spike. We gave this presentation or a version of it just about a year ago, and that has almost doubled. Just since Q4, it's up 33%. So you're seeing that just escalate and escalate on how much people are having to pay to recover from ransomware attacks. And those are just the payments. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, where's that all coming from? Those payments are coming from a couple different major ransomware systems right now. Now, there are a few real popular ones out there, and you'll notice the difference on that spike between Q4 and Q1 with these top three. These are the top three. Obviously, one of them is a much smaller component, but we are seeing them almost double, at least, and even on the third, even triple what it was in Q4. We have some that have also taken the decline the other way. So you're really seeing a balance, but a lot of increased payments coming through. Now with that, it's what's that costing us globally? And globally, we're seeing cybercrime is close to $6 trillion is the projected cost for next year. By the end of 2021, we're looking at 6 trillion with a T. To put that in perspective, we've got companies that have just been valued at a couple $1 trillion. Major Fortune 3 companies. This are bigger than some country economies on what this is coming out to. And that number has doubled just since 2015. Now when I look at that component for cybercrime, I want to pull a piece out of that and look at what it is just for ransomware. And for ransomware, it's projected at a $20 billion annual is what the impact of ransomware attacks are across the globe. Now that you've also seen that spike go up. If I go as far back as 2015, that number was $325 million. Now with an M, but we're projecting 20 billion. And where you saw that really change, 2017, it more than doubled. You look at 2018, we're at 8 billion. 2019, the total number that we saw was $11.5 billion. Look at that jump to 20 billion by the end of 2021. It really is just continually going up and up. One of the big segments that are really being impacted by ransomware today are government systems. Now, you can see everything from in just 2020, the first half of 2020, we saw 60 different companies, 60 different government systems that were impacted. Of those, 19 were just in January. Now it's not just main government system you think of states and cities. There's also things like we saw more than 40 healthcare systems were impacted. Almost 20 universities were impacted in 2020 alone. And those are the ones that are reported so far. We know there will be more that we don't know about yet that were impacted or maybe didn't report. But if we look at some real specific examples to kind of make sure it hits close to home, there have been a lot of places that were hit. We'll take end of 2019 as an example. Just in the end of 2019, we saw places like Augusta, Maine, that froze the city's entire network and stopped their forced their city center to close down. They couldn't have their employees there. City of Baltimore was hit by a major ransomware attack, took down all their systems. You see places like Tallahassee and Jackson County, Georgia, even Atlanta, that were shut down by cyber attacks, all within the beginning of 2019. Now, it's also very specific parts of places. When I go outside of the US, City Power in Johannesburg, South Africa, was hit by a ransomware attack and caused them an outage in July of 2019. So it's been going, no matter where it is, across the globe. And when I talk about that around the globe, it's because this is truly a global epidemic. Now, when you look at it today, no country, no area is immune. You see where the attacks are happening, and they're starting in places like the US, they're starting in Brazil, they're in India, they're in Asia, they're all over Europe. When you look at this pie chart and you see how evenly distributed it is across the globe, you know that it is not a single place that's impacted, but it's impacted globally. And it's happening more frequently than you expect. Right now, the estimate is every 11 seconds somebody's going to be hit by ransomware. That's down, I should say, from every 14 seconds in 2019. So it's really super frequent these things are getting hit. Every 11 seconds you get hit, but it doesn't matter how frequently you get hit. What really matters is how long it lasts. And right now, the average impact is 15 days. That's how long people are expecting to have an outage of some sort in their environment from ransomware. The good thing is, people are taking this seriously. People are prepared. That's down about 7% from last year. Doesn't mean that 15 days is light by any stretch. I'm pretty sure we all know a half a month of business is not ideal to be lost for any company. And it's companies all over the place. No industry is immune to what is happening on this. Professional services are a huge portion of places that are hit. These are things like consulting firms, accounting firms, could be anything you're looking at on that professional kind of the knowledge worker space. But then a huge increase since 2019, and I hate to say it, but it's the reality, is healthcare systems are getting hit more and more. In the middle of a global pandemic, we're having people that are attacking the healthcare systems that we rely on, and we really need to make sure that we're putting all into place to protect everything across the board. This goes down all the way down into those state and local governments, and of course, software, technology, any industry you can think of. Retail as well. Some place that's being hit hard by the economic impacts right now is the retail space, and it's being hit, again, heavily by ransomware. Now, we asked people in some surveys we took, and you'll see some more stats throughout as we've done this. We've taken some surveys at different sessions about how many people thought they had been impacted by ransomware. Now, surprisingly, the larger portion of you said no, and we're here to tell you you're probably wrong. Now, I hate to say it, but you're wrong. You've been hit. Whether you've been hit at a large scale, whether you had to pay a ransom is a different story. But that 11 seconds is when someone tried to attack your environment, and more people got hit than a third of them that say they have been. Don't worry, it's not uncommon. And we're going to go through and show you a few ways that they can impact it. Now, traditionally, most people expect it to be a vulnerability, some exploit in your environment. Whether there's a gap in your firewall, whether there's software that has some sort of software leak in it, that's probably what people would think. That's what Hollywood tells us. That's how hackers get into our system. I left the firewall open. It's like I left the back door to my house open and they just walked in. That's just not realistic for what's happening a lot of times today. There are a lot of other ways that things are coming in. In fact, one of the most common is through spear phishing. Now, spear phishing is one of those ones you get the email in, and we've all seen that email. I think everybody that's watching this in technology at some point has seen the email that's come through that just hasn't quite seemed right. And when you dig into one like this, you'll notice that probably not using a random email account there for coming from a bank. It's just not right. See 91%.
My favorite ones are the ones that come from Microsoft and send me to a Google form. Those are the best ones.
Right. Yeah, you get those and you're like, well, maybe not. Or the guys that are like, oh, I'm coming from this bank from my Hotmail account. Come on, guys. Let's be real. Nobody's doing that. Every small company can get a URL, get an email address. It's pretty easy. So pay attention to that. I mean, in all reality, there were a lot of places that have been attacked by this. 300 universities were attacked by an Iranian group using spear phishing between 2018 and 2022. 144 of them were compromised. the combined loss of data just from that activity was projected at 31 terabytes of data with IP that was worth close to $3 billion. Spear phishing is real, and we need to pay attention to it. And it's a very easy way people get into your environment. Now, another way that people get into your environment, that this one just kills me that people aren't protecting themselves from it more, is RDP. Remote Desktop Protocol. I get it's easier to manage the systems remotely, especially when we're all working from home. But don't leave it wide open. When I can go out on the black...
Know who you are.
Right. I can go out on the dark web. I can find your credentials. Maybe not yours specifically, but something for most environments. And you can buy them for $20. Not saying it's all out there for yours, but do you really know? Lock down your environments. Make sure, use RDP is fine. Internal. Don't leave it wide open. We all know what port it is. Don't do it. 3389 should not be wide open. Don't do it. So, next we're going to look at things like other ways people came in. And we've all had that friend that was hacked on Facebook. Well, the large portion of us. Not Chris. Only his MySpace has been attacked. He doesn't do Facebook. So, we do worry about his MySpace nowadays, however. So, Facebook hack is one that people don't really think about. You get that message in, it's an embedded image in a social media message. That image is, this one, for example, is a low-key malware. That malware, what it does is you click on that SVG file that's passed to you. It tries to push you to a spoofed YouTube page that then will eventually redirect you, if need be. Or it'll tell you need a codec to play it. That's the most common. It's a pretty old trick on this one. Download this codec and it'll be fine. That codec is malware. Don't download the codec. Just don't do it. The next is malvertisement. Now, malvertisement is when you see that image, and this is something that you can stop. There's a lot of ways to stop this, and Chris is going to go into them later in the presentation, some things that you can do at the edge to help. But when you see that image, you click on the image, and it actually redirects you again to someplace else to get your data before it goes to the final location. So they are really more than just annoying. Now, this is one of my favorite questions every time it comes up. What year was the first ransomware attack? And most people seem to think that it was a little newer than it was. It's pretty spread across, but in all reality, the first ransomware attack started in 1989. It was actually an AIDS Trojan, as they called it. It was actually done by some researchers to send and get this survey back during the AIDS epidemic. And it was sent on floppy disk. Once they sent it out there, you put it on, you start giving the data into the survey, and you had 90 times to reboot that machine. And once you reboot it 90 times, and this was old school Windows 95 days, you rebooted pretty frequently, you had to then pay them for the software and for the unlocking it, and it locked it. That was the first version in 1989. You go from there into what might look like it was done in the early 90s. But you look at something like this ransomware attack here. Now this is from Petya. Now Petya looks a little dated on the screen, but this is after it's encrypted your machine and told you need to pay with Bitcoin to get it back. Obviously very modern, countdown timers, the whole 9 yards. This is just one example of what it'll look like. Another is something like CryptoLocker. Now, CryptoLocker will show up and act like it's a real government agency. Now, it's going to have all these different images, and you'll see it flashing through here. I took about 2 minutes and went and found a few other images from the agencies that it could be. This is not what a government raid looks like. Just because you get this in there, this is not from an official government agency. What a real government raid looks like is when these guys show up with jackets on and guns and start taking stuff out of your office. And the good thing is, we at least know they're being good and staying hydrated. So, very important thing that Chris and I like to point out in this slide. So from there, we now look at some of what the top current ransomware threats are. I started very early on by showing you those top 3. Now, I look at how they're coming in. Now, looking at the amount of money that these ransomware attacks are taking from the global economy on an annualized basis, and then how they're coming in, whether it's in spear phishing or RDP, there's a lot of ways they're coming in. So you got to make sure you're training your people to do the right thing at the right time. Now, these are just a few stats to give you an idea of what the environment looks like. But it's not just about showing you numbers. Showing you numbers doesn't do any good if we don't talk about what a few real life examples look like. So, Chris, why don't you jump in with the first of our nice real life examples?
Thanks, Mike. So this is the portion of our Scare You Straight presentation. What we're actually going to take you through is, now that Mike's gone through a lot of the stats, these are real examples. And the reason we put these in here is because when you hear what real customers had to go through, you should really start to think about the pain and angst that they had. And we'll get into some of that, but this is really about what actually happens when you get attacked. It's not just about getting that pop-up that says pay us. There's a whole snowball effect, if you will, that happens downstream and downhill as we go. So let's start at the beginning with this particular customer. And obviously, we've removed the names in good Men in Black fashion in the company information because, we've pulled this one out of the archives a little bit. So this was, as Mike said, started very simply with the user opening an email. They probably thought it was, some friend of theirs, a link to dogs, cats, puppies, whatever. But this is, outside of the other examples like RDP, probably the most common example. And we've all seen this. We've all gotten those emails like Mike showed. We, here at VMworld, hopefully are smart enough to look at that. And we'll get into how we have to train our users a little bit. This particular ransomware, and I don't remember which one it was, did its job of auto-installing. And what it did is it took its time. So what made this one very, very interesting, because it didn't just happen right away. It searched and searched and searched throughout the network. It went through different buildings. It went through different infrastructure. It just went and continued to propagate until it basically got to a point where it thought it was done. And we'll talk about that in a second. So with that, we asked our friends in one of our surveys how long most people thought ransomware incubates. Now, I always find this one interesting because 6 months seems like a long time. I don't know about you, but I come from an Italian family, and we have a history, and we want our money when we want our money. 6 months kind of a long time. Most of these guys, I'm guessing, want it a lot faster than that. So we always thought this was interesting that close to 50% of the people thought it was 6 months. In reality, what we're seeing in most environments, it's 2 to 4 weeks, like right in that 1 month period, because they're trying to minimize the amount of time it's in the environment so it can't be discovered and maximize the amount of payment. So with this particular one, it ran about 2 or 3 weeks. And ultimately, it found about 400 Windows servers and decided it was done. And overnight, it encrypted all of the hard drives on all the Windows machines. Every single machine that was running Windows operating system was completely locked out. Now, you can imagine, those of us who have ever been on pager duty or, been on call, some stuff started to go off. Alerts started to happen. People in the middle of the night started getting notified that certain systems and applications were no longer working. So we also asked a lot of folks, obviously being working for Cohesity, a backup company, what operating system do a lot of people run for their backups? And surprisingly, more than 30% still run Windows. So that sort of strikes an exclamation point on this customer was hit by ransomware that attacked Windows machines. It did actually affect their backups, and we'll talk about that. They could not recover from backup, and this was part of the snowball process. It's good to see that a lot of people are over that 50% mark with dedicated appliances, so we, for one, thank you for that.
Good job.
So once they actually got into work, the IT guys were already there, but employees started to show up the next morning, and employees started to try to log into their computers, get on their phones, and realized, hey, stuff isn't working. Help desk calls started coming in, and of course, those of us who have worked in IT for a while, who already knew about the issue, were getting the phone call saying, yeah, we know it's a problem, leave us alone so we can go fix it. They had to basically decide what to do with all the employees. And ultimately, they sent them home at one point because they needed to work the problem. And they got the ransomware alert that said, hey, you owe us money and you have so much time to do it. So this was in the first 24, within the time that it was encrypted, we're less than 24 hours. It took 3 weeks to incubate, and in less than a day, they're now in the situation where they are at critical mass, essentially. The reason we asked this question for a reason. and I'll get into that in the next slide, but surprisingly, not a lot of companies have a Bitcoin account, or an employee who has a Bitcoin account, or a corporate Bitcoin account, or any kind of cryptocurrency account for that matter. It's about 50-50. This was really important to this customer because they did not have a Bitcoin account. They actually didn't have any employee who had a Bitcoin account. This is where it gets even more interesting. They decided to pay. It was $70,000 in Bitcoin. They said, fine, we got enough money, we'll make it work. Finance approved it. And they said, how do we pay? And the guy said, we need to go pay via Bitcoin. And finance said, but we don't have a Bitcoin account. And they said, does anybody else have a Bitcoin account? No. Well, I got a friend who has a Bitcoin account. They literally sent $70,000 to a friend of an employee to pay their ransom. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure the legal department had a field day with that one. So, okay, we get past that hurdle, and they get their ransom paid. Well, what happens next is they receive 400 keys, unmarked keys, in a text file, with no indication of which server, which key is associated with. Now, you might have noticed that Mike and I don't have hair. We electively shave our heads. This right here would have made me lose every last ounce of hair on the top of my head. Because this turned into now the next level of the snowball. One by one, server by server, person by person, key, server, no match, key, server, no match, key, server, match, cross it off the list. This was a very manual step-by-step process. So going back to Mike's outage stat, this is what causes that time of outage, because you're not just paying the ransom and getting back online. You're paying the ransom and having to deal with the rest of the crap that's coming down the pike. So we asked a lot of people, and this one happens to be kind of a joke answer, and everybody likes to take the joke answer. What is companies' tolerances for payment? Now, most people like to answer they don't negotiate with terrorists, but we all know differently. Most people now are well over that $100,000 mark. They're willing to pay to get their data back. If they cannot recover it, restore it, they will do anything it takes and pay any amount of money or go out of business. And there has been examples, and unfortunately for this presentation we didn't grab any, there has been examples where people didn't pay and closed up shop. Just disappeared, filed Chapter 11, went under, no more business. But most large organizations are willing to pay because the offset of that expense is not worth closing the doors. So, going back to our example, we get the Bitcoin money to the right guy, who's a guy who knows a guy who pays the Bitcoin, we get our unmarked keys back and we start to decrypt. Well, we start getting through the process and now machines start crashing. Why? So everybody said stop everything and had to understand why when they were inserting the right key, the machines were crashing. Well, come to find out, another little hidden gem of these encryption algorithms, it doesn't just decrypt the drive. It made a copy of the drive in a decrypted fashion. So, if you already had a machine that was 70% full and you tried to decrypt it and it tried to copy 70% full over to another copy on the same drive, that's what my grandfather called oblivion. It just doesn't work. You can't put that much data in that little space and expect it to work. So they had to stop everything. They had to go back, expand drives on systems they knew were already over 50%, now that they knew what the process was going to incur, so that they could go back and start continuing the process again. This was another delay in the whole entire environment. So they get that figured out. They get that fixed, and they say, okay, let's keep on trucking, right? They start shuffling that data around. They start moving stuff around. Look at these are all virtual machines, right? So it's easy to do. We can add new drives. We can move data. We can expand them. And they get to the point where they can start to finally finish the decryption process. I mentioned earlier they sent everybody home. Well, 3 days. 3 full days, there was no employees in the office except the IT team. Now, that actually sounds pretty good. I mean, to Mike's 15-day process for most people, that's gone down 7%. These guys actually did a pretty good job in getting everything through all of these different horrors, and it's like a house of mirrors, really, as you start going through this. They decided to bring everybody back to work. So the real impact of this because they couldn't recover from backup. And I'll repeat that again, right? Their backup systems were Windows. So their first attempt, obviously, was, hey, can we recover from backup? No, those systems are encrypted too. Now what do we do? But their loss of impact, their business impact was huge, and it wasn't just to employees. So they obviously had lost revenue and lost employee productivity. That's a given. They actually were a just-in-time supply company with SLAs. They violated SLAs to their customers, which cost them additional money. Then there was their reputation to their customers, their own employees, their business partners. Most importantly, to everybody watching this who works in IT, it exposed their and maybe your lack of preparation and tools to deal with something like this. There was a lot of heads that probably got put on the chopping block because their only option was to pay. Now let's go back to what they paid. They paid $70,000. $70,000, got all this stuff done. Their final total in losses for 3 days, and again, very short period of time, very well done by this company, $12 million. Just because they paid 70 grand doesn't mean that's all it cost them. And that's a big missing component in all this, where everybody thinks you can pay, get your data back, and keep moving. You're gonna have additional impact that you just can't control. So one of our last survey questions that we always ask, it was, how confident are you in your team's preparedness for something like this? And this really does run the gamut. And what's strange is most everybody falls in the middle. They're not really confident. They're not really not confident. So it's sort of indifferent. And that speaks volumes in and of itself, right? The people who are highly confident, very low percentage. So yes, we know we can deal with this. The ones who are very low confidence, also easy. The ones in the middle, you gotta really, if you land in there, you gotta figure out how you fix that. Because you gotta move either up or down. Like if you're low confidence, you can work to fix it.
Yeah, I really think when you start looking at that bell curve is what you get for so many different things. I mean, you get the bell curve of right in those middle people, they got work to do. They're not confident. I mean, and I would always personally be concerned about saying I'm a 5 on this one. Like,
yeah, I don't know that anybody's a 5.
Always something we can do more, especially today. It's moving too fast. So I think, Chris, your example there is a great example of kind of this single impact, the one company impact on it. But let's take that even to a bit more of a macro scale. Let's look at how something can have a global economic disruption just because one company really got hit. And I'm going to dig into that by looking at NotPetya. So I mentioned Petya before. This was another one called NotPetya. So they're very original in their names. But this one is NotPetya. And we're going to talk about how honestly there's no boundaries to how ransomware will attack across it. It doesn't stop at country borders. It doesn't stop at state borders on it. I mean, there was a ransomware cost in Atlanta that was $10 million. Well, it cost them $10 million, but WannaCry, which was another one, cost, had almost $8 billion worth of damage is what it's estimated at. So really, it does go all across the gamut. But when I'm looking at NotPetya specifically, we believe that NotPetya was actually a state-sanctioned attack from Russia on the Ukraine. Now that seems very specific. Very much hits across borders. Russia to the Ukraine. And that's it. But not for them. They also used a couple vulnerabilities. Things like Eternal Blue that were already known. These were, NSA had already said this was a vulnerability that was there. Things that should have been patched. Maybe they weren't. Maybe the time wasn't there. A lot of companies need to get Windows before things are patched. So that's what started to hit it. And then it used a second part called Mimikatz. Now Mimikatz is important because what it allows you to do is get credentials off of a system, including local admin credentials on systems. Now, initially we talked about how it impacted one company with Chris's example. Now this was how it impacted all of the Ukraine. Now it impacted what they call their MEDocs software. Now MEDocs is similar to a QuickBooks in the States. A lot of small businesses use it. It's the most popular accounting software across the Ukraine. Now, you think, oh, it hit a couple domestic companies. Just a few examples of some of the things that were hit that utilized MEDocs on it. Their telecom system. Okay, so my phones are down. That's obviously annoying, but We can work with that. The airport, I'm not crazy about that one if I'm flying anywhere, whenever we can fly. The State Savings Bank, again, I'd like to make sure my money stays exactly where it is with everything electronic right now.
Mike, come on, point out your favorite one.
And you know, my favorite is definitely the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Like, come on. No, I definitely have an issue. There should be no risk of radiation monitoring on something that's already had a problem. So what happened was, all of these, I look at the second largest bank in the Ukraine, Ashka Bank. On theirs, and I'm going to jump into it right away, theirs, within 45 minutes of them finding they were hit, 90% of their systems were impacted. They didn't have that incubation period that Chris talked about. For them, it hit right away. But it wasn't just the Ukraine. It hit across the globe. And multiple multinational companies were impacted, not just those small places. There was an estimate that globally it was $10 trillion worth of losses from NotPetya. Now that impacted everyone from FedEx to Merck to the guys that make Cadbury eggs and Lysol. Like, these are things that people don't think about, but these are huge, large companies. The one that I want to dig into, though, is Maersk. So Maersk is a moving company. They're a shipping company. Now, they are one of the largest shipping lines in the world. They're based out of Denmark, 80,000 employees around the globe, and they support thousands and thousands of vessels, many that are on the sea every day. They also have a lot of ports that they manage on that. And about a fifth of the world's shipping capacity actually goes through Maersk at any given time. I'm sure driving down the road, you've seen the big rigs that have Maersk across the back of the container on it. It's a pretty common name on that. Now, their IT department is actually based in the UK, not in Denmark. And they've got about 45,000 machines around the globe, and then 4,000 servers. Not a huge environment, but big enough. Now, for them, ME-Docs ended up getting installed on a single system that was in the port of Ukraine. Just in an office that was doing some accounting in Odessa. Now, with that, what it caused was it hit their entire system and caused immediately about a 20% reduction in operations globally for them. And it impacted 17 of the 76 main ports that they used. You look at the one in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and there were miles and miles of trucks sitting outside that they couldn't let in. Because all their systems that showed what truck was coming in, what was in that container to go on that ship, to go to the next place, were all systems that were impacted. Now, you can't let a truck in if you can't tell what it is, and now they're having to convert it all back to paper. They couldn't take any new bookings, they couldn't track anything, no idea. Every place from the port of LA to ports in Spain, the port in Rotterdam, all over the globe I got impacted by impacting a single system in Odessa. Now, they need to recover, so what do? The first thing they did was they hired one of those big consulting firms. They hired Deloitte to come in and basically said, here's a blank check. Go fix it. Now, normally that sounds great, but go fix it, a blank check doesn't always matter. It's not always the answer. It takes a lot of time, a lot of people. 200 Deloitte employees were sent over. They had almost 400 of their own IT employees that were in play. And then they had backups for most of their systems. Most were between 3 and 7 days old, not horrible. The ones that they had at ports for tracking, they could probably get a little bit closer. The problem they had was their domain controllers. Because they were Windows boxes and it spread through like wildfire, all of their Windows boxes were simultaneously locked and encrypted. Now, for all of us in tech, we're very familiar with how much a domain controller matters. That's why you don't have one, you have multiples. Well, they had multiples. But when you can't get to them, well, you can't get to them except for one. They did find one domain controller that happened to be available in Africa. They had a power outage. They were able to go down and think, okay, well, we'll just get it. Well, it's not that easy. Because that drive, when they found it, they had to get the system out. Unfortunately, they had nobody authorized to work in the UK that was there. So they had to then transport that in a truck to another country, who would take it to Nigeria, fly from Nigeria up to the UK, just so they could take a hard drive, put it in, start to recover their Active Directory, just so they get the rest of their systems. Took about 3 days for the ports to reopen and start operation. They were turning people away. They had refrigerated shipments they had to deal with. Those SLAs Chris talked about. It was probably 14 days until their employees started getting their systems back. Between 10 and 14 days. And a lot of that was because once it happened, they were actually threatened and told that if they turned on their system, they would be fired and prosecuted. Because it was that bad. They were then possibly reinfecting their systems. They didn't know what they were going to do. So when you look at it from a single site to the global impact and all the stats, we really need to look at what we can do to help on this. And how does this work? So for that, we got to look at some ways to defend against this. So I know we're not the first one, but Chris, what do you got?
Yeah, so hopefully, like these examples we've given you, they're real, but we have to understand how to deal with them, right? So I'm going to actually talk about a concept that we've had for a while. You know, we used to talk about defense in depth for years. You know, it just came to security. But I'm actually going to apply the whole defense in depth methodology to how we deal with ransomware, and then, you know, what you do if you get to the end of the line. So the first thing is training, right? Nobody really thinks about this, but that first email, you've got to train people to think for themselves. Like, does this look real? Does this make sense? If it gets through and it gets to their inbox, perfect example is, we all have families at home. We should be training our own families about, hey, if something doesn't look right, let me take a look at it first. My wife runs a small business. She knows if something looks suspicious to come and ask first. The only way you can solve it at that first point of entry is by training and identification. The second way is at the edge. Now, this is actually interesting because if you look around the Twitters and, you know, the interwebs, we all use different solutions. Those of us in IT, there's OpenDNS, there's NextDNS, there's Pi-hole. A lot of people are using that. What that does is some of us may or may not know this, but if the person gets the email and clicks the link, this step prevents it. So things like Pi-hole for the malvertising, things like OpenDNS and NextDNS for known bad links, they will get blocked the minute they click it. So if they don't realize it and they do click it, hopefully it's now protected here. So step one, step two.
And the
third step,
Chris, I think it's important we talk about there's some enterprise solutions for that as well. I mean, those are a lot of the home ones, but there's things like Cisco Umbrella.
Well, that's OpenDNS.
For large
ones.
ones.
It's the same.
Right, but
yeah.
A lot of people don't know that.
No. But the challenge there too is that will protect a laptop, but not a client device necessarily, like an iPhone or iOS. So you got to look at the types of devices people are using too. This isn't an easy problem because that email comes into your desktop, into your phone, into your iPad, and all of those things are probably on the same network at some point. So yeah, you've got to really think about this. How do I capture it at the edge? And like Mike said, Umbrella is a great solution, and some of these other ones, even just play with them at home. The third one seems pretty obvious. It's antivirus, right? We've been running this for years in malware protection, and Windows has it built in, and everybody has it. And you don't need it for Mac. You do need it for Mac. Like the arguments have gone on forever. Run something, right? I mean, this is really if you get past that edge and it does download something, you should try to catch it again, right? This is the third layer that hopefully will be caught with a browser plugin or Windows Defender or something else, or Symantec, or pick one. I don't care. This is my favorite. And I am going to say it, patch your shit. Because people just don't patch. Or they wait too long. Or they just don't do the schedule. Or they find a reason not to. Bob Plankers, I think, is always on Twitter saying this, right? This is one of the very core things that you have to be able to do. And even Mike said it. There was a patch out for NotPetya. It just wasn't applied to everybody. So patch your stuff, please, for the sake of everybody. It's like wearing a mask. Just patch your shit. Backups. Backups can work if your system isn't infected. So hopefully you're running a backup system that might not be susceptible to these types of intrusions or lockouts. But traditional file backups, they offer the protection, but if they do get attacked, you're kind of left like that customer was. You can't actually rely on the backups. So backup is only as good as the ability to restore. We've all been doing this a long time. We all test the backup, we never test the restore. And finally, that recovery process. Not only can you recover, how fast can you recover? What does that recovery process look like? How long is it going to take to do 1,000 machines? or 100 machines, or even 2,000 machines. We don't know, because does everybody really test it at scale? Most people test one or two, yeah, that one worked great. But when you really get hit with it and you have to restore all of your machines, or a good portion of them all at once, how long is that recovery going to take? So, in a real world disaster, essentially, so training failed, okay, it got through, you didn't have anything at the edge, and the client AV wasn't up to date, you didn't bother patching your stuff for like 6 months, your backups got infected, or all that's left is your backups and the ability to recover. What do? Well, that's where Cohesity becomes kind of your last line of defense, because that's what we do. We do backup and recovery really, really well. And we're going to talk really quick about how we actually handle that recovery process. So the very first thing that we do is we reduce the attack surface. So you go back to what I said about backup systems getting attacked. We give you the ability to protect, control, and leverage the data. So at the core of the system, we are very, very small, right? We can globally dedupe, we can dedupe, we can do all of that stuff within a single UI, but it's a very small attack surface. Secondly, we help you assess the security posture. So we've actually got a capability to run vulnerability scans on VMs that have been backed up into the platform. So, hey, we'll tell you, this system doesn't seem right. It looks like there's something going on. We see some encryption that wasn't there yesterday. We'll send alerts. Now, we're not doing it on the production system. That's why we Mike and I always like to play on the words, but we aren't that first level of defense, right? We're going to catch it once it gets onto our system. Well, we're going to be able to give you the ability to instantly recover that particular VM back to a good known point in time that we see in our snap tree, essentially. Third, we're an immutable file system, right? We use multi-factor authentication. We have worm capability. We protect the actual backup data. So the data itself that's on the system is not susceptible to attack, neither is the system itself. So it's kind of a nice double-edged sword, right? We can cover both angles of it because of the way we run the file system. Detection of changes and anomaly detection is huge. So where we can maybe look for a security vulnerability, this is a little bit different. We can actually alert you that says, hey, we saw your backup set significantly change from set A to set B. And oh, by the way, we can't index certain files because now they're encrypted and they weren't yesterday, or they weren't an hour ago when we ran the backup job. Now, there's a whole bunch of discussion that has to happen on how often are you backing them up, what do the data sets look like, how often are we comparing them. But if you're doing them, say, hourly, and it's good, whoa, problem, you will mainly have to go back 1 hour or less, right? But we're going to give you that indication through anomaly detection through our SaaS portal called Helios. So how do we actually respond to an attack? And I think this, to me, and actually we've been moving to data centers, so we've actually been using this process to move a data center within our team. But the way we do what's called instant mass restore is not entirely unique, but it's very, very efficient the way we do it. So I'm going to walk you through a quick animation. But what we do from a hypervisor perspective is we'll take our first backup. We call that backup 0. We put that onto the system. That becomes a full copy. Now, this is where we do things a little bit differently. When you take your next incremental, let's say it's the next hour, the next day, or the next 6 hours, doesn't matter. We'll take a zero-cost clone of that first backup, and then we'll take the incremental and we'll apply that to that clone. Now, to you, that looks like 2 fully hydrated images. So you don't have to do a restore of the backup and then apply the incremental during the restoration process. It's already been done. So we're actually building a catalog of usable images. When we take your next incremental, we do the same thing. Take a zero-cost clone of the backup with the first incremental, we take the next incremental and apply it. Now we've got 3 images in that catalog. Whole number of use cases for this, outside of just recovery from ransomware. What if you wanted to go to a particular version of your VM and hand it to a developer? Well, pick the one you want in the catalog and make them a copy. It's there. The process of restoring is no different. The use case could be different, but it doesn't matter to us. Once we actually do a recovery, we can do it with near zero RTOs, and we can do it at scale with hundreds of virtual machines at one time. And what we basically do is we present those VMs back to Virtual Center, we mount them on our storage, we power them all on, and then we invoke a storage vMotion. So for a period of time, your VMs are running on our platform, but they're available. And they're available almost instantly. And then we actually worry about moving the storage behind the scenes, but we do all of that for you. So for a large number of VMs, The storage vMotion could take a while. We can't control that process. That's been around for a while. So what does this mean when we compare instant restore, what we call instant restore, to traditional legacy restoration? And why is this important in a ransomware attack? Well, in a traditional restore, legacy restore, you initiate the restore, you then wait, right, for the VM to become, essentially rehydrated from the restoration process. You then maybe move it to a target device, maybe apply an incremental. There's some other stuff that goes on in between. And then finally, the user gets access, right? They don't get access till the very end of that process. In our scenario, and that could take 45 minutes, it could take any number of time depending on the backup solution. In the Cohesity solution, we initiate the restore and we give the user access right away, literally within seconds. So they can start working on the system. Maybe they're checking to make sure that restoration was the right one and is still not infected. It's still a good copy. But the user can interact with the virtual machine right away. Then we worry about moving the data from, say, our system back onto your Pure or your Nimble or your Tintri or whatever your array is. We don't care where it lands at the end of it. We even have a portion of this process where we don't move it. We can just stand up for test and development purposes and we never even move it to primary storage. So the big difference here is that it's about 10 times faster user interaction to the machine to start getting the systems back online. So go back to those scenarios Mike and I talked about. That 3 days maybe could have been 3 hours for that first customer. If they were able to just recover to a known good point, they might have had some gap in data, but they'd have been back online and been able to actually continue processing orders and at least bring employees back into the office the same day. So why do we call ourselves the last line of defense for predictable recovery? I think Mike and I came up with this term. We should probably trademark that. It's a nice phrase. But it's this pie chart, right? It's about having a reduced attack surface, a single global platform to manage it from. It's about having vulnerability scanning, what we call cyber scanning, being able to assess your security posture as a whole. It's about being able to defend your backups from being a target. Write once, read many, immutable file system, all of those things that are built into the platform. Finally, second to last is to detect. So can we detect a ransomware attack? Again, we're detecting it on a backup copy. Let's not make any bones about that. We're not detecting it in production. But we still may be catching it before you even know. We might see something going on, at least give you some indication. But finally, it's all about response, right? Anytime you get into a situation, especially like those other customers were, when heads are not cool, people are thinking illogically, you're basically in the you-know-what show of this attack, you need to be able to respond. You need to be able to respond predictably. That's what we can do for customers, and we can enable that instant mass restore capability and get you back online as fast as possible. And all that comes through the platform known as Cohesity. That brings us to the end of the presentation for today, and I do believe we have a virtual space within VMworld that you can go chat with some folks online throughout the week if you're watching this in your time zone. We don't really have a booth number like we normally would, so it's a little bit new to everybody to say, go visit my booth on the trade show floor. So, and the last thing we want to point out is please fill out your surveys. They are very important, even though these are recorded this year. It is how we as presenters get feedback. Mike and I do actually read these. We do present them to our managers. So they
Read
can see
every
how
comment.
we did. Every time, good, bad, or indifferent. And then lastly, just thank you for attending this presentation and enjoy the rest of your VMworld 2020.
Thank you, everybody.